so much for joining us today. This is Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, and as always, I'm wishing you the best. And you can join us both in person and you can visit many of our classes and workshops. If you just go to naturalnurse.com, you will be able to see the full schedule. You actually go to naturalnurse.com and then click on calendar. And we have so many classes and workshops. By the way, many of our courses are CE certified, which means if you take them, you are able to get CE credits. And that's for many different kinds of professions. For instance, nurses, midwives, nutritionists, RDs, massage therapists. All of you would get credit for taking many of our classes. We have lots of exciting things going on now. Some are free. For instance, if you go to naturalnurse.com calendar or naturalnurse.com events, you will see we are in the midst of the anxiety revolution. Proven tips from leading experts to transform stress and anxiety to peace and power. And I'll be talking about that in terms of herbal medicine, and that has been proven scientifically as well as used by thousands of my patients for the last 50 years that I have been doing natural. Also, on September 5th, coming up really soon, we have a Long Island Herbalist Guild meeting. And on September 15th, we have an online that features CE credits, and that is for scientific validation of herbal medicine, and it has 3 CE credits, which is really excellent. Also, we have the Herbalism and Pharmacognosy Conference. That's live in Miami, September 16th to 17th, and that also grants professional credits. We have the fall season Chinatown Herb Walk coming up, which is like going to another country. And we have an online class on thyroid, adrenal, pituitary, the sacred triune, and herbal balance to help those. And that's coming up also. So they're all listed there with information on how to join us in person, how to join us online. And we're very, very happy to have you come on board with the Natural Alternatives Posse, as Dr. Zamperone says. And we're so happy to have as our guest today, Nurse Linda Smith. Linda is an RN, an MS, HNBC, CHTP, and CCA, lots of degrees because she's a master's degree nurse, a board-certified holistic nurse, and is also certified in healing touch and in clinical aromatherapy. She has a private healing practice and teaches both energy healing and aromatherapy around the world. She assists clients to discover what is working in their life and what is not working, physically, mentally, and emotionally, and spiritually. And she helps them find the balance needed to restore health in all its forms. She talks about the power of energy healing and the use of essential oils. Linda is also the author of many books, and we'll be talking about at least one of them today, in particular, Hildegard de Bigen, Holistic Approach to Wellness. And you can find Linda at transformationalwellnessservices.com. So thank you so much for joining us today, Linda Smith.
For inviting me.
Now, let's go back in time and tell us what led you to become a nurse in the first place.
Oh, my. That was well over 40 years ago. I was actually a high school teacher, but I had a great desire to work with my hands. And yes, I took a lot of art classes in college, but I just didn't feel that I was creative enough to make that my life's work. And so as I looked around, I knew someone who was actually a hospital administrator, and she invited me in the summers to come and work as a nurse's aide in the hospital. And that's where I really caught the bug, and I thought, this is what I want. I want to be a nurse. And so since I already had a degree actually in history, back then there was not available a way to go into a master's program unless you already had a degree in nursing. So I went to a diploma school. And in the diploma school, there is such an emphasis on body, mind, spirit, at least the one that I went to. And so I looked at that as, oh my, this is the whole person that we're looking at here. And that really, really spoke to me. However, when I graduated, that kind of nursing really was not available. And so I became a critical care nurse. And I worked emergency room, then ICU, CCU, and it was after about 5 years that the patient, I remember it as clear as yesterday, the patient I was assigned that particular day in the coronary care unit, I could not get anywhere near the person's body for all the machines. Well, and I remember standing at the foot of the bed and going, there is something wrong with this scene. I am ministering to machines, not to people. And at that point, I decided I need to find a way out. And actually, the way out that I found was teaching paramedics. And it was like bringing me full circle back because I actually loved teaching adults. But high school students, I really never related to. And so I did that for a while, went back and did the political thing that you're supposed to do. That is, I went and picked up the degree in nursing, and then was able to go on and get my master's in community health nursing.
Well, that's a beautiful progression through what went on with you. And I know what you do now is something that you call Christian-based energy healing.
Yes,
What is that?
Well, all right, for many years, I was actually the administrator for the Healing Touch program based out of Colorado. And my role was to work with coordinators and instructors all around the country and internationally setting up courses. But on weekends, I would be somewhere out in the country teaching Healing Touch classes. And after a while, I began to pick up a trend. And the trend was that students would ask me, usually at a break or when they thought nobody else was listening, and they would whisper, how do I talk to my priest, or how do I talk to my minister about this stuff? Or they would ask, how does this stuff fit with my faith? And at first I would just answer, my thoughts about that. And finally I went, wait a minute, every week somebody's asking me this. I said, what are you asking me for? And they said, oh, because you're more spiritual in how you present this work. And I thought, oh, wait a minute, this, when you're teaching someone's curriculum, you can't just add your own stuff in. And then it kind of dawned on me, oh, yeah, I bring my background. Every teacher brings their background when they're teaching a curriculum, and so that flavor will, it will affect how you present things. And part of my background that I have not yet mentioned is the fact that for 27 years I had been a Catholic nun. And I had left religious community right before I found the work of energy healing. And for me, everything I had ever done in ministry prepared me to do this next piece of work in my life. It was a fulfillment of everything I had ever done in the past. And so when I began to develop my own energy work, it was to help people who were struggling with the language of energy healing. And so I went back and I looked at the scriptures. And I took one Bible And I went through the New Testament and underlined all of the healing passages, and I began to see patterns. And the patterns that I saw was that Jesus or the disciples would pray, they would lay on hands, and they would anoint. And it was like I saw the not just a pattern, but I saw the key. This is how the early Christian church was so successful in healing, is that they had tapped into what I recognize as three forms of vibrational healing. Prayer. Prayer is intentionality. And what is intentionality? But it's a vibrational frequency. You're tapping into that which is greater than us, which is at a higher frequency. And what is the laying on of hands but being a conduit through which higher energy can flow for this person in whatever way they need? And then what is these anointing? They were not anointing with their cooking oil. They were not anointing with their lamp oil. They were anointing with the known healing oils of their day, such as frankincense and myrrh, cedarwood, hyssop. And the scriptures never bothered to mention which oils they used because they all knew what they were. And so, if you study anything about how the scriptures were written down, there was an economy of words. And so if everybody knew something, there was no need to mention it. It's just everybody knew it. The problem is, here we are 2,000 years later, and we don't remember what they were. And so you have to go back and you have to look at the culture of the day. What was the known medicine chest of the day? And those were essential oils. It wasn't just the herbs, but they would steep the oils either in like a vinegar, or they would steep them in oil in the olive oil, and then that mixture is what they used to anoint.
That's a great description of your development of both your theory and your practice as a holistic nurse. Now, tell us more about that part, because I am also a member of the American Holistic Nurses Association, and I am an AHNBC. You are an HNBC. Like, that's a lot of work to get recognized. How did you feel when you came across the American Holistic Nurses Association?
I was actually in graduate school at the time, getting my master's in community health nursing. I had been a director of a home health care agency, and I didn't have really the credentials to be doing what I was doing. So I went on and got my master's in that, at the end of which I went on and became director of several hospices. But what happened was, one of my instructors knew my holistic bent towards things, and she put a flyer in my mailbox for the AHNA. And I looked at that, and I thought, God, this is something that's just right up my alley. And, of course, they had a student rate, and that I thought, well, I can afford the student rate. And so when I got my first newsletter, it was advertising their annual convention in Colorado. And I thought, God, I'd really love to go to Colorado. And so I went, but the day before I was to get on the plane, I was in a car accident, and I had a terrible whiplash. And I had the imprint of the steering column on my chest. So I was in a lot of pain, but this inner voice was saying, you've got to be there, you've got to be there. And so when I went out there, I was in such pain I couldn't even turn my head. But they had something in their schedule called Nurture the Nurse Time. And one of their offerings was massage. And I thought, oh, good, I'll get somebody to massage my neck. Well, when I walked in, they said, oh, here's a table, get on the table. And so I got on the table, and they were not doing massage. They were doing something that I now recognize as healing touch. And this gal worked with me, and to make a long story really short, I received a tremendous emotional and spiritual healing through that work, and that really caught my attention. So that was my first introduction to AHNA. It was only a matter of 4 years later that I was selected the Holistic Nurse of the Year in 1992, and it was through my work as a hospice director. So I've been a lifelong member of AHNA ever since, and actually that's how I got my certification as a holistic nurse, is that I was grandfathered in because of being a Holistic Nurse of the Year.
Oh, that's really an interesting story, Linda. Thank you for sharing it, because I will say, all of you nurses listening in today, joining the American Holistic Nurses Association is something you want to do, and you can say, Ellen Cam, I told you so, because it really opens that bridge, don't you think, Linda, between what you wanted to do in the first place as a healer and bringing it into the language of nursing. And by the time I found the American Holistic Nurses Association, I was also, I would say, upset with nursing because it seemed so impersonal, and most of our time was about charting, and very little time, if any, was about healing. And we were told to do things in the hospital such as wake people up at 2 in the morning and give them a sleeping pill, even though they're already sleeping.
Yeah, I know. Right.
Which made it, to me, a moral dilemma, because I felt like dumping the pills down the toilet and just charting that I did it. You know, but that's illegal. So, but that would be the humane and correct thing to do in terms of from a healer's perspective. It really, when I found the American Holistic Nurses Association, I was excited because, you know, don't you feel that whole group and the tone reflects your love of healing, but your interest in science as well.
Exactly, yeah. And of course, I had the privilege of knowing personally Charlotte McGuire, who was the founder of the American Holistic Nurses Association, as well as I was friends with all of the leaders who were on the boards of directors. And in fact, I was elected to the board of directors at one point, but was actually not able to serve because I had just recently become the administrator for the Healing Touch program, which was one of their sponsored programs, and so they saw that as a conflict of interest. So, but yes, AHNA is you know, the nursing organization that I belong to.
Isn't that great? Yeah, so that's something that we have in common, and I noticed that when I found your work. So many interesting things that you're involved with in terms of the power of prayer. And you call that the power of prayer, but let's say someone doesn't like prayer. You can use the word intention, hands-on healing. I studied very much Dr. Larry Dossey, who you might be familiar with his research, and of course his wife, Barbara Dossey, is so instrumental in the American Holistic Nurses Association. He did some amazing research on the power of prayer.
Yes. I've read all of Larry's work, and you know, I've been friends with Larry and Barbara for many years now, and the power of prayer. He looked at it from a scientific perspective, which I think was a very good tact, because it's bringing together science and spirituality. And that's exactly what the physicists are doing now, is that they are looking at what I would call the whole spiritual side and using that to explain the unusual phenomena that no other language can explain. And he was one of the early pioneers who would actually do that. And, of course, his reputation was way on the line when he started talking about prayer. But prayer is nothing more than tapping into the vibrational frequency of that which is greater than us. I don't care what kind of name you give it. You can call it God. You can call it universal energy. You can call it whatever name fits for you, and it's still the same thing. You ask people, well, tell me, what is God? And they'll say, depending on their particular, religious upbringing or training, they may say, well, God is light. Okay, so tell me what light is. Well, light is energy. So what you're saying is that God is pure energy. And energy, that which permeates everything that is around us and within us. And so, from that you can say, well then, God is within us. We have that higher energy that we can access for not only for ourselves, but for other people.
Well, that is a beautiful, beautiful description. And that's what I loved about Dr. Darcy's work as well, because by doing actually verifiable and quantifiable studies, and they were also double-blind, then you have the language to speak within conventional medicine. Because while both you and myself have chosen to actually not be able to function within the realms of conventional medicine, but set up outside of that in terms of things like you have done with healing touch and clinical aromatherapy. My goal at this point, because, I got my nursing degree in 1973 as well, so it's a while ago. My goal at this point is to bring in our now completely verified holistic interventions, such as aromatherapy, such as energy work, such as healing, into, and also for me, herbal medicine and homeopathy, bring that into standard of practice. And the reason is it works better. It is much less expensive when we talk about cost of care, and it's a much, much better adverse effect ratio.
It's almost like we have taken the development of healthcare is turned upside down. There is a place for surgery and a place for pharmaceutical chemicals, but we have made those primary, and we have ignored the fact that there is thousands and thousands of years of historical healing tradition that we have access to that really works very well for most things. But if I'm in a car accident and I've got broken bones, whatever, I don't want somebody just praying over me.
Oh, of course. We don't throw out emergency medicine, which is absolutely supreme.
That's
but
right.
How about things like a stomach ache? Rather than moving towards very aggressive drugs and stomach surgery, how about changing diet, looking for food allergies, using peppermint and ginger, using probiotics as a first line of intervention within standard of care?
Right, but we have educated our people to want to go to the doctor and ask for the pill.
That's true, yes.
Yeah. And, and I have run across so many people who, I've given them the answers of different ways that can really help their particular problem. And I've had people look at me and go, I'd rather just have a pill.
Oh, yeah, if it's somebody's choice. It's unfortunate, however, that now we know through scientific data that those pills, while they might move a number, let's say lower blood pressure number, they do not lead to overall better health and wellness.
No.
So that's the issue.
Right, and all pharmaceutical drugs, which are chemical-based, created in a laboratory, they are inert substances, meaning there's nothing living in them, and when you introduce that into a living being, they will cause side effects, for which you have to take another drug to counteract those side effects. But, of course, that drug has side effects. And so, when I was in home health care, we would talk to patients and, of course, get a list of all of their drugs. they'd be taking a shoebox full of drugs, 99% of which were to counteract the side effects of another drug.
That's exactly right. You know, how many people, like you're pointing out, Linda, what happens if somebody comes to you? And you know what? We're going to take a little break here because we've been chatting, and we do want to give a chance to have a little break. So we'd like our engineer to go ahead and play a natural medicine chest, if they could bring that up. And when we come back, we're going to continue our discussion with very wise woman, Linda Smith, holistic nurse and healing touch and clinical aromatherapy professional. You can find her at transformationalwellnessservices.com. And we will be right back with more right here on The Natural Nurse and Dr. Z.
On this edition of the Natural Medicine Chest, we'll discuss the ancient Chinese science and art of acupuncture.
Acupuncture is a 5,000-year-old medical procedure involving insertion and manipulation of needles into specific points on the body. It is often applied to relieve pain during surgery and for many other conditions.
Acupuncture needles have been found in China that are over 4,000 years old. The first needles were made of stone. Later, bronze, gold, or silver was used, and today they are usually made from steel. Acupuncture was developed around the theory of special meridian points on the body connected to the internal organs, and that vital energy, or qi, flows along these meridians. According to this theory, diseases are caused by interrupted energy flow, and the stimulation of these points restores normal energy circulation. There is some scientific evidence of the existence of the meridians as a separate circulatory system. Studies were done in the 1970s by a Dr. Kim from Korea, where he injected radioactive dyes into the traditional acupuncture points. He observed migration of the dyes along the exact predicted path of the meridians.
How acupuncture works remains uncertain, but both Western and Eastern scientific studies on rabbits have shown that the analgesic effects are not simply a matter of suggestion. After the discovery in 1975 of endorphins, natural pain inhibitors in the body, some neurophysiologists suggested that the needles may trigger the release of these substances. American and Chinese studies have confirmed that placing acupuncture needles in the brains of dogs raises the level of endorphins in the spinal fluid.
Acupuncture is used today in most hospitals in China and by many private practitioners in virtually every country in the world, including the United States. The primary use is for analgesia, although ulcers, hypertension, asthma, and other conditions have been documented to respond favorably to this treatment. Chinese surgeons prefer acupuncture to the use of drug-induced analgesia because they claim it does not disturb normal body physiology and therefore does not make the patient vulnerable to shock. Brain surgery is especially amenable to this form of analgesia when it is necessary to keep the patient awake during the operation.
Although some modifications in the practice of acupuncture have been made, such as sometimes using a small electric current on the needle instead of the traditional twirling, acupuncture remains intact as an ancient therapeutic technique that has been used successfully for at least 5,000 years. Perhaps you'd like to add this piece of knowledge to your natural medicine chest.
You are listening to PRN, Progressive Radio Network.
Yes, hello, and thank you for joining us back. Once again, this is Ellen Kamai, the Natural Nurse, and we'd love you to join with us. Please visit naturalnurse.com. Go to events or calendar. You'll see the full list. Also, you can take any of our classes. Most of them have CE credits for nurses, midwives, nutritionists, massage therapists, acupuncturists, and of course, you can take the classes whether or not you need any CE credits. So they are totally open to the public. Many of them are free of charge. Many of them are on ground, which means you come visit with us in person, wherever we are, and it's all around the country. And we also have lots of online classes, which of course are available to you no matter where you are. So check it out. Today, we're so happy to have on board another holistic nurse, and that is Linda Smith. And she is a master's degree nurse, board certified holistic nurse. And we have been talking about her energy healing with healing touch and clinical aromatherapy. And she has written so many books. Thank you so much for joining us today, Linda.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Now, how did you have time? I mean, I had asked you when I first met you online, gee, do you have a book? And you wrote back something like, what, 40 of them? I mean, how have you had time to write so much?
Well, let's see. They all came out of a need that I observed that nobody was writing about. And my first book, which was basically on healing touch, no one had written any books on healing touch at that point. And I kept saying, somebody needs to write a book. Somebody needs to write a book. Finally, I thought, well, if nobody's going to do it, I guess I need to. And I had never written anything before. So I, came up with an outline. I said, okay, I'm going to have this many chapters, and this is what I need to write about. And then I proceeded to just start writing and, of course, researching. And when I got my manuscript written, I thought, well, I really need somebody who knows, the flow and all this stuff to take a look at this book and be an editor. So I found a really good editor. I lived in Colorado at the time, and I found this editor in Boulder. And I brought her my manuscript. Now, this is in the days where, you had to have a written manuscript, and then they would go through and write it up. And so I brought it to her, and about 3 weeks later, she called me up, and she said, now, come over. I have a few things I need to say. And so before she handed me the book, she said, now, dearie, we all go through this. And she said, there's a lot of changes that need to be made. I've made them in red. And she said, you're going to rewrite this book and bring it back to me. And I was so excited. And when I opened it, I remember tearing up because there was more red on the page than there was black ink. And so I took that home, I took it to heart, and I thought, okay, she's teaching me how to be a better writer. And so I rewrote the book, brought it back to her, and this time there were very few things that she had to say needed to be corrected. And so that was the launching of my first book. Now, my second book was after I got into aromatherapy, and I had an extensive library on aromatherapy, but what I discovered was most people were writing from a British perspective, not a French perspective. Why? Well, because Americans, we read English. We don't really read French. And there's two entirely different approaches to aromatherapy based on whether it comes out of the British model or the French model. And so as I was going to start developing a certification in clinical aromatherapy program, I thought, no, I really lean towards the French model, not the British model. The British model basically says this is dangerous stuff, you have to be very careful, and you would never take it internally, and you always have to dilute. And I thought, that's wrong. That just doesn't fit. And so I, read what I could out of the French model and said, okay, if we're going to affect internal changes in the body, we need to be able to get the oils in, which means you have to be very careful to make sure that you're using the pure essential oils. you definitely never want to buy oils that are out of the store. If it's cheap, that's a pretty good sign that it was made in a chemistry lab. So you want only the purest essential oils, which means you got to do your research. And I did my research. I called up countless companies, talked to them, asked them about who grew the plants, were they grown without pesticides and herbicides, who did the distilling, who does the bottling. And most of those companies could not even tell me that. They said, well, we just buy from the middleman. We trust that the middleman, has done all of that. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute, that's not good enough for me. I wanted a company that I could trust that not only grew the plants, but they oversaw who did the distilling and the bottling. And so those are the ones that
you recommend.
What kind of testing are they doing?
Right. So, Linda, basically, if people are interested in that information specifically from you, they could definitely get in touch with you.
That's right.
And that would be at transformationalwellnessservices.com. Now, you talk about energy healing. Can you work with someone doing energy healing even if they are not in?
If they're not in what?
In your area.
You mean
let's say someone who hears
healing.
you.
Yes.
Okay, so that's good. So how would that work?
Okay, well then you have to understand like the physics of how healing actually occurs. And if you understand that we are all part of the same energy network, what I can do is, as a healer, is to literally tap into someone's energy field from a distance and be able to find where the imbalances are and work with that from a distance. And generally what I do is first of all, get into that state of connection. And then I, in a sense, summon their energy field to be on my table. And then I will assess as if the person is actually there. And I'm able to discover where the flow of energy is and where it's not flowing, and then bring balance to that area. And all I ask is that the person on the other end simply lays down and rest. I don't need them to do anything, but just be in that receptive, meditative place themselves.
Well, then I know people actually do feel that. So I want to move on to another topic here because you've been so wonderful at sharing all this information. How I found you is through research I was doing on Hildegard, and that's Hildegard de Bingen. What a fascinating character. And of everyone whose information I read, I found the most comprehensive information and so personally and intelligently shared was through a book you wrote called Hildegard of Bingen, that's Bingen, Holistic Approach to Wellness. Because that's what you were talking about, this ancient 12th century healer and visionary. And she used aromatherapy, and she used healthy lifestyle practices that are so similar to what we do as holistic nurses today. So I was just fascinated with your book and with your research about Hildegard. Tell us a little bit about her.
Well, I was actually familiar with Hildegard de Bingen from a spiritual tradition. And she wrote a lot of meditations. She was what we would call a deeply spiritual woman who flied in the face of the church at the time. But because of her writings, church officials were afraid to touch this woman. It was pretty obvious to them that she was receiving a lot of information through her, what they call her voices. She heard voices from the time that she was 3 years old. And these voices basically dictated to her all of her writing. And she wrote volumes on not only theology, but philosophy, and a whole book on medicine. I'm looking for her book right now. I mean, that book on my bookshelf.
Wow, that's wonderful that you were able to track that down and actually have a copy.
Well, actually, it's not all that hard to find. If you go to Amazon and you look up Hildegard de Bingen, you will find many of her books there. And I have on my shelf her mystical visions. Her primary book is called Physica, meaning the physical. And I've got about 30 books, either written about her, explaining her work, or a translation of her books. And so she would actually, she was, when you read some of her stuff, you just laugh out loud, because she will say, now take this plant, boil it in a pot of wine with the lid on top until you see a sheen. Well, what is she doing? She's crudely distilling the oil out of the plant. Then she would say, now, throw away the plant, put in some flour, and make a porridge out of this, and take that internally, and that should cure you of your poison, unless, of course, you die. Or God does not want you to live. And so I looked at that, and I would just laugh out loud. But what she was doing was covering her bases.
Right. Well, also, from a women's lib perspective, she was amazing. I mean, the years that she was living in a man's world, and as you point out in your book, it was at the time of the burnings, where they were burning witches, anyone who said they could heal people somehow, and she was able to scoot around all of that.
Yes, she was, and it was because of that early on, the abbot, where she was placed as a child, the abbot became aware of all of these writings and got a little afraid. And so he took the writings, gave it to a famous monk of the day, Bernard of Clairvaux, who happened to have the ear of the Pope. Bernard of Clairvaux looked at her writings and went, God, this stuff is really, really good. So he told the Pope to give her a blessing, which then meant nobody could touch her. Okay, so she basically would just tell the Archbishop off when she didn't like what he was doing or saying. And he was too afraid of this woman. However, in her elderly years, she was 80 years old. Some soldier of fortune was mortally wounded, fell on the doorstep of one of her abbeys. There was no time to send for the village priest so he could properly confess his sins before he died. And so they sent for Mother Hildegard. Okay, Hildegard comes, sits at his bedside, and he promptly confesses his whole wayward life to her and dies. Well, as far as she's concerned, he's in God's good graces. So she had a mass said for him and buried him in the churchyard. Okay, according to the church's rules at the time, that was not correct because he did not properly confess to a priest. And so the Archbishop sent her a curt letter telling her to dig up the infidels' bones and cast them out.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes, and so here is this 82-year-old woman in the dead of night out in the churchyard erasing any sign of where he had been buried.
Oh, she's just so radical.
Yes, she's very radical. And so the Archbishop was so PO'd that he sent her a letter casting her and the entire abbey out of the church. It was called an interdict, which forbid them to sing the prayers of the church. And their life was all built around singing these beautiful, beautiful prayers. And so she fired off letters, not only to that archbishop, but to every cardinal and to the Pope himself. And you know what she said? You're all going to hell unless you lift this interdict.
That is just, oh my God. She where did she get her strength of character? We do need to take one more break right here. And we are talking today to nurse and author and aromatherapist and energy healer, Linda Lee Smith. And we are talking now, and we'll continue our discussion about her book about Hildegard de Bigen. I suggest you look at that book. She's got her own photographs in it, and we will continue talking about it. You can find her at transformationalwellnessservices.com. And we're going to take a little break right here on The Natural Nurse and Dr. Z and hear about the wonderful offerings right here on Progressive Radio Network. We will be right back with more.
I'm Gary Null, the founder of the Progressive Radio Network. Today we have more than 80 producers bringing forth the most progressive and most liberating information, the kind of information you do not regularly hear on any of the mainstream or alternative media. You can help us now. Up to this point, I have virtually supported the Progressive Radio Network, all of its expenses and payroll, myself. But we would like to expand our reach. We'd like to do far more. We'd like to be able to advertise on Facebook and let others know we exist. We are the #1 progressive radio network in the world. In fact, we have programs that are most listened to in all of progressive radio. But we could go a lot further. Our message could reach a lot more people, especially at a time when people are desperate for honest, objective insights on the important topical issues of our day. How can you help? It's simple. Go to prn.fm, go to our main page. In the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a little button, Support Now. And then whatever you can contribute on a monthly basis will make a big difference. It will help get the message out. It will help inform more people, it will give them more choices. This is where you'll hear in the independent candidates and the people looking to challenge the corruption in government and industries. But we need to get our reach out further. So please, whatever you can afford on a monthly basis, and there's some suggestions there, and it'll be automatic. All right? Thank you very much for continuing to help us help you and the rest of the world on these important issues.
This is Karen Hartglass, host of It's All About Food, and you're listening to PRN, your source for progressive, up-to-date, and inspirational information on nutrition and health.
And welcome back once again right here to Natural Alternatives. This is your host, Ellen Kamai, the Natural Nurse, and we love to hear from you. You can get our newsletters free by just going to naturalnurse.com and type nothing but your email into the left corner. If you'd like to join us for any of our current or upcoming classes or workshops, go to naturalnurse.com, click on calendar. They're all there with information on how to join us. Or look at our educational offerings in which we can teach you how to become a registered herbalist, or you can get a certificate in herbal medicine through our school, The Natural Nurse. All kinds of ways. And of course, hundreds and hundreds of radio shows, many of which links right here to Progressive Radio Network. So we love to hear from you. Today, we are talking to our guest, Linda Smith, RN, and lots of other degrees besides that. You can find her at Transformational Wellness Services. And she's talking to us at the moment about Hildegard. What amazing stories you have put in your beautiful book. Now, how can people get your book, Hildegard of Bigen's Holistic Approach to Wellness?
Oh, the easiest way, of course, is just get it through Amazon, but you need to put in my full name, Linda Lee Smith, in order to find some. I don't understand how Amazon does things, but if you just put in Linda Smith, it's one of the most common names in the United States, and so tons of other things come up. So if you put in Linda Lee Smith, then you'll get a list of my books. Now, Hildegard de Bigen's Holistic Approach to Wellness was actually it's not a big book. It's only like 66 pages, and I'm not a believer in just writing huge volumes of words when you're trying to get across a point. And so, for me, it's like, let me just give it to you in succinct pieces that you don't have to go and search for yourself. So I tell people a little bit about who Hildegard is, and then I talk primarily about her holistic medicine. And her medicine is actually still being practiced today in Germany. There is a Dr. Hildegard Strelo, who is a German, who directs and practices at the Hildegards Center. I can't remember now what town it's in, but it's somewhere near the Rhine River. And people from around the world will travel to go there because they either have heard about it or they have not found the solutions to their particular problems, and so they're trying to find something holistic.
Yes, that's very true. People will reach for holistic approaches after they kind of are out of, things that work in conventional. That's true, which is too bad because I think the real beauty of holistic is really in prevention. And Hildegard also talked about specific herbs and specific foods.
That's right.
Do you want to share some of those information with us as we get towards the end of our show?
Well, she was a big promoter for proper nutrition and for like food combinations. But some of the things, let me see here.
Well, one thing I found really amazing was that in our day of wheat-free, that she talked about really liking spelt as a wonderful grain.
Right.
And that was interesting.
Well, it was because that was the main grain that was available in the 12th century. And so she has, in fact, I give a recipe for her spice cookies for the nerves in the book. And I made them once. And they're a little bit dense, but they're really very good. I'll give you one example of one of her recipes.
Okay.
And it was about rose oil. And she says, rose strengthens any potion or ointment or any other medication when it's added to it. Her favorite perfume, mix 1 teaspoon of olive oil with 4 drops of rose oil and 2 drops of sage oil. That was in her writings. She said this was a remedy for anger and was meant to bring joy and happiness.
I know. And then she also, besides foods and herbs, she talked about using gemstones in healing, which is something I discuss a lot. And one thing I found interesting was she talked about specific gemstones and what they're for, and the fact that they should be inserted in the body. For instance, if you had a cold or a sinus infection, using a specific gemstone and putting it in your nostril. That's pretty interesting.
Yes, and she would lay out the gemstones on the body in the places of the chakras.
Right. Although she probably didn't have that particular word for it.
That's right. Yeah.
So what a completely fascinating character. And I love that she talked about very specific herbs. And what I did at a presentation is I looked at her outline of how she would treat a specific illness. It was about the heart, using herbs such as galangal, which is a ginger, similar. It's a Thai ginger,
right.
and then also a specific gemstone, and then certain foods that she would use, and also, prayers and a spiritual focus. It sounds just like holistic medicine to me.
And she talked a lot about sleep. A carefully managed pattern of waking and sleeping. It requires attention, she says, and an overall planning of equilibrium in everyday life. And so she talked about what oils, and again, she did not have access to pure essential oils. She had to make them, and her primary way of doing that was boiling the particular plant until there was this sheen on top, which of course is the oil. And then sometimes she would just use the oil from the top, or sometimes she would put in flour, mix up porridge, and that would be something that somebody would take internally for whatever their illness was.
Right, she really was into that.
She was also into saunas. She thought saunas were just the cat's meow. She would say, now take this balsam fir.
Well, of course, wait, she's from Germany, so they even still use that now.
Right. Take this balsam fir and use it in the sauna. Well, when you study what the properties of balsam fir are, is that they are primarily for the respiratory system. So they open the passages to enable better breathing. So she was right on with just about everything that she suggested.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being our guest today, Linda Lee Smith, and thanks for reminding us that is the best way for people to look for you, by Linda Lee Smith, RN, and of course, is transformationalwellnessservices.com. Is that a good place for people to look for you as well?
Yes, and you can find all of my books right on our webpage as well.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for all the great work you have been doing as a nurse and as a healer for so many years, helping so many others. And the books are great because that makes it accessible for anyone to find out all this wonderful information. And thank you, listeners, for joining us once again right here on The Natural Nurse and Dr. Z. You can always find us at naturalnurse.com or drznaturally.com, and we love to hear from you. Until next time, this is Ellen Kamai, the Natural Nurse, hoping that you stay healthy.